you so much. Cardinal Turkson, Sister Helen, uh, uh, Gustavo, and Paulo, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I was reflecting this morning on the last time I was in this room. The only other time was 6 months ago. I'm okay. I had the opportunity to join a similar convening on AI with some folks in the room. And I started my remarks then with explaining that everything I know about the dignity of work started with what I learned from my grandparents. My grandparents immigrated from Ireland a century ago, and my grandfather worked as an elevator operator in Chicago, and that job gave him a great deal of dignity. Going to our opening remarks, it was purpose, it was meaning, socialization, and I think one of the things he most got out of it was the sense that his hard work was enabling opportunity for the next generations, which for me culminated in the opportunity to study at Notre Dame. 6 months later, miraculously, we now have a pope from Chicago. The moderator of our panel is from Ireland, and Notre Dame is co-hosting this seminar. So I'm choosing my words very carefully because apparently what I say in this room manifests in some amazing way. Let's hope it does for the rest of my talk. So the theme of this panel is on reskilling, and I'm actually not going to talk about reskilling. Often when I'm in conversations about AI in the future of work, I find that the emphasis on reskilling accepts a paradigm where technology is predetermined and sort of the best we can do for workers is just try to help them adjust to whatever happens next. Separate from that, we're also terrible as a society at reskilling. We've never done it well, so I wouldn't hang my hat on that. But I believe that living up to the promise of the first Rerum Novarum calls on us to do something much bolder. I think we should not just be adapting to where technology's taking us. I think to David's point, we should be shaping that trajectories, going to how do we maximize the potential for workers and minimize harms, and doing that in a very proactive way. You know, Pope Leo, over 100 years ago, in his original, Pope Leo XIII, I should be clear, in the original Rerum Novarum, didn't ask, how do we help workers adapt to a grueling 16-hour day? He very clearly said, a grueling 16-hour day is unacceptable. Here's how society should change that. I think we face a similar challenge, which is what are the big structural changes that need to be put in place so that workers thrive? So in that spirit, very much with my theory that AI has wonderful worries and worry, and we should be maximizing the gains and minimizing the harms. Here are my 3 principles. Assuming I'm manifesting here, there will be a new digital Rerum Novarum published for an AI age. Here are 3 principles I hope are included. The first is I hope that social justice, which was very much talked about with Sister Helen, trumps what I'm calling technological determinism. And what I mean by that is I'm struck, especially in Silicon Valley, but I worry increasingly in the general public and even in Washington where I work, there's this increasingly dominant narrative that AI's path is inevitable, that a combination of market forces, geopolitics, and something honestly almost religious inherent in the technology itself is creating this sort of unwavering river that we have no power to adjust. And it's actually futile to try to intervene. And in fact, maybe we'd be better off if we just hurry up and get to the other side and we all get UBI. And, you know, of course, these forces are present. There's no question that today AI is being shaped by those very forces. But those forces, many of them were also present in the Industrial Revolution, to David's point. And that's why we got things like child labor and terrible inequality. And it took structural intervention, labor unions, wage laws, workers' rights, that ultimately altered that. And Rerum Novarum was what underpinned those changes. Today, we need something equivalent, mechanisms that are going to steer this in a way that's going to allow workers to thrive. And here's just a few categories. One is the kind of incentives that we'll get to David's talk. How do we have incentives both to the tech developers, but also employers to make sure we're creating and deploying AI that's really collaborating with and augmenting workers and not simply trying to substitute for them? How do we think about new forms of worker voice participation, particularly in countries like the United States, where unfortunately my research shows the sectors that stand to be disrupted the most have almost no union density? What are some new novel ideas? Perhaps Rerum Novarum could put some of those ideas out that make sure workers themselves are part of this conversation. What are new models or maybe old models of gain sharing? Workers will be more productive. How do we make sure that benefits are really equitably shared? And also, what are some carrots and sticks, particularly for employers? And just as an example, I'm working right now on a report about the potential for AI to impact early career workers, which is something we're starting to see in the data. Not 100% clear it's from AI, but definitely a worry. And something I'm thinking about is, what are some incentives to make sure employers continue to invest in training for young people, even when AI can do some of that work? Um, the second area where I see the church really having an important role is in articulating the dignity of working over this growing sense of techno-utopianism. And let me explain what I mean by that. Jaron is going to sort of probably recognize this most. Silicon Valley has put out a vision, some might say a fantasy, some might say a delusion, that the world we're going into with incredibly, if we get to a point of having incredibly capable AI that rivals humans, maybe exceeds humans at work, that maybe we are going into a world of what they're calling radical abundance, where AI unlocks all this wealth. Somehow people all get this wealth and we no longer need to be bothered with work. And that somehow this is better for society. And the way I see this is almost like Silicon Valley is suggesting there's a new Garden of Eden potential where Adam and Eve are not put on earth to till the land, which is the opening pages of Genesis. Maybe it's for leisure or some other purpose that is not tied to work. I think this is, and troublingly, I've started to hear just in the last few weeks something that really worries me, that a justification of this vision in a way that I think is a distortion of the Catholic notion of the dignity of work. And in this framing that I'm hearing both from technologists, but increasingly from some prominent economists as well, too little work is quote unquote dignified. Too much work is not well paid. It's not meaningful. It's not the laptop class. So in that sense, maybe those workers would be better off without work if we get to the point where we can automate that work and come up with something else. And I find this dangerous and dystopian for so many levels, even if we never get anywhere near a world where AI is good enough to replace humans. Just the fact that there's a promise of something better, trust us as we automate these jobs, could undermine support, I think, for the urgent reforms that we need today. I think the church has a unique place, a voice. 2,000 years of church teaching tells us that the dignity of work is not in your title. It's the dignity of work is in the worker. And it's the expression of work that is not only expressing God's gifts, our talents, and gives us purpose, but John Paul II said, it is in working that we become more human. And that is true if you're a carpenter like Jesus, if you're an elevator operator like my grandfather, or if you're a very high paid lawyer. Of course, the church's mission is unfinished in the sense that a lot of work is not worthy of the dignity of the people who have it. It is too low paid. The conditions aren't good enough. But I think the unfinished agenda is to figure out how to improve those working conditions, not simply to replace it. Finally, my last sort of call for this hopeful Rerum Novarum that I am now manifesting in this talk is, I'm really struck by something I heard the last time I was here. Pope Francis, I believe it was in Laudato Si, had a framing that we should ultimately, there's lots of possibility with AI and there's peril. And ultimately, at the end of the day, how we should measure AI is how much it lifts up the least among us. I've thought about that constantly since I was here 6 months ago. My observation is, at least in the world of work, I actually think right now AI is doing the opposite. I think if you look at the usage data on AI, it's overwhelmingly college-educated workers, knowledge workers, it's rich countries. And I think innovation is following the same pattern. If you just take how AI tools are being developed in healthcare, think about the volumes of AI products that have been developed to help doctors save time, do note-taking, help with their clinical judgment. I don't know that there has honestly been a single innovation designed so far to help a low-paid home health aide improve her work. And to David's point, I think there's enormous potential to take jobs that currently are very low paid and are not ones that have much upward mobility, and think about how the AI can be harnessed to increase the expertise. Home health, and in fact, I'm working on the first pilot to figure out if we can do this. with home health aides, enormous potential. I think this is an area where it reminds me when I worked in global health 20 years ago, we had a concept called neglected diseases. And it was the idea that pharmaceutical companies had no financial incentive to cure diseases that only affect poor countries. And so it created something called the 1090 gap. Less than 10% of all pharmaceutical research and development money went to the diseases that comprise 90% of the global disease burden. I think AI could follow that trajectory unless we intervene. And this is where I see the Catholic Church playing an enormous role. I'm inspired by the Rome call. I think you could do something similar here. Call on the multilaterals, philanthropy, employers. Let's commit real resources. Imagine an innovation fund just dedicated to unleashing the potential of AI to improve the livelihoods of those least among us and bring their voices into that. So in sum, technology is not destiny. We have agency if we act. And I hope that this next Rerum Novarum has the emphasis on social justice, structural changes, and the urgency to make sure AI lives up its potential to truly lift up humanity. Thank you.